Is that on? Wonderful. Thank you for having me, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 7198, the Prove It Act of 2024, will help small businesses around the country comply with the overwhelming weight of federal regulation. This bill is an important bipartisan piece of legislation and should not be controversial. Small businesses around the country are struggling to comply with the onslaught of new regulations that are enacted each year by federal agencies. Many small business owners are their own compliance officers, and they often don't have the resources to hire lawyers and compliance professionals to help them stay on the right side of the law. Many of these regulations also have significant economic impact on these small businesses, which result in higher prices at the cash register and higher inflation. In some cases, small businesses never open their doors in the first place because of an insurmountable mountain of regulation. This harms all Americans through reduced competition and innovation in our economy. Faced with the burden of crippling compliance costs and regulations, it is no small wonder that businesses around the country are struggling. Under the Regulatory Flexibility Act, or RFA, agencies are supposed to take the unique needs and attributes of small businesses into consideration when crafting regulations. All too often, however, agencies do not comply with the RFA's mandates. One report found that in 75% of rulemakings, the agencies either ignored costs on small businesses or underestimated the regulation's cost. H.R. 7198, the Prove It Act of 2024, would strengthen the RFA's existing provisions and make it more difficult for agencies to skirt their statutory obligations to our country's small businesses. The Prove It Act requires agencies to measure indirect costs imposed on small businesses by that agency's regulations and closes the loopholes which allow agencies to ignore the RFA requirements. The Prove It Act also allows small businesses to petition the Small Business Administration, or SBA, to investigate a rulemaking process when a small business owner believes the agency inadequately performed its regulatory analysis as required by the RFA. Additionally, the Prove It Act authorizes the Small Business Association's Chief Advocacy Council to independently investigate a rulemaking agency's compliance with the RFA. Finally, it creates a penalty for rulemaking agencies that fail to comply with the RFA's requirements. These are common sense reforms to ensure that the law Congress passed more than 40 years ago is working as it should. I look forward to answering questions, but before I get to the specific questions, I'd also like to address a specific case study that relates to the USDA's EID mandate. On November 5th, the USDA, or the Department of Agriculture, issued a rule mandating electronic identification ear tags on cattle and bison, which places a substantial burden on small ranchers, and that's when the rule went into effect. The USDA completed a brief 2-page initial regulatory flexibility analysis, which found, using the SBA's guidelines, that the majority of cattle operations in the U.S. are considered small. After acknowledging that the proposed rule would have an outsized impact on small businesses, the agency conducted insufficient analysis based on outdated and incorrect information. This analysis relied on cost estimates created by APHIS, and the agency's estimate undervalues the cost to ranchers, and it has refused to publicly disclose how the costs were calculated. This example of avoiding the RFA requirements resulted in USDA misrepresenting the true and accurate cost of the rule and how the burden is shouldered by small businesses. Further, the USDA and the ear tag manufacturers are wholly unprepared to alleviate the harm caused by the rule. Under the Prove It Act, the USDA would be required to account for the additional, reasonably foreseeable indirect costs that are borne by ranchers because of this rule, costs which the USDA is currently ignoring. Finally, the Prove It Act would give a voice to the ranchers and the organizations which represent them to point out the obvious flaws in APHIS's proposal, flaws which ranching groups and I have petitioned OIRA to review. So with that, I would answer any questions that you may have, and I yield.